I want to talk about another case we've been following about baby Emanuel. We've talked about this a lot of times on this show, but Jake Haro, I'm sorry, pled guilty, and that's her father. We've been following this story. Essentially, let's catch up on what's happening. Baby Emanuel was reported missing on October 14th by his parents, Jake and Rebecca. Both parents were ultimately arrested, and they still have not found baby Emanuel, but they believe that baby Emanuel is dead, have charged both of them with the death. Well, there's no information about the whereabouts. Jake, father, changed his plea last week, and he's pled guilty to second-degree murder. Mother Rebecca is still pleading not guilty. So I want to talk a little bit more about this case, and then I want to dive into what happened here. So Jake was in court for a settlement conference. That's where both sides exchange information, try to negotiate a plea deal. He pled guilty without a negotiated sentence. And what I call, and I don't know what y'all call this, but we call it a blind plea or a non-negotiated plea. So what is that? That is when you plead blind, when you walk in and the judge is going to give you a sentence and you don't have an agreed upon sentence. And I want to open it up to you all to talk about the reasons why Jake might have actually chosen this path. Jonna, let's start with you. I have my guesses, but what's your take?
So here we call it a plea to the sheet, right? So if you plead to the sheet, nobody can tell you what you're going to do, not do, etc. And he probably did this. The main reason, I think, the baby is still missing. He can plead to the sheet and never have to open his mouth about where that child is, which is also disgusting. But if that's what he's going to do, I guarantee you that the judge will throw the book at him because he's not giving anybody closure. And this also gives the mom an opportunity for some plausible deniability. Maybe she's going to say, it was all him. It was all him. And I couldn't say anything. She might not get the book thrown at her, and she might not have to plea to a murder. So it's an interesting thing here, but that's why he did it. So he doesn't have to open his mouth.
Dave, you agree with Jonna, or you think it's something else?
No, we call it plea up to the court, not as sexy as plea to the sheets.
I know, plea to the sheets is kind of.
That's a better phrase. Leave it to Jonna. Here I am, plea to the court. It's so dull. But you do that because you don't anticipate you're going to get any real deal from prosecutors, and you just want to be done with this and think you're going to get a better sentence from the judge. You know, the death penalty is still there in California. There's been a moratorium on it. The governor's imposed a moratorium. And so there's still that possibility. So he took that off the table by pleading to second-degree murder, and now he is ineligible for the death penalty. He will get life in prison, most likely. The worst part of this case is not just this horrific death of this poor child, but the fact that he's done it before. He brutally beat up another infant, leaving that poor infant with permanent damage. And yet back then, apparently the judge sort of gave him a slap on the wrist. And I think this whole thing is an embarrassment for the criminal justice system. What happened, that this guy was still out there to do it again. Mm-hmm. So I think it does put some pressure on the wife, actually, because remember, the wife, her whole thing was that she was the victim. She has a black eye because he beat her, and she had this whole story, which is nonsense. So now I think they could turn the screws on the wife here, actually. So that's the only part I disagree with Jonna. There's an old saying, first in, first to win. The first criminal defense lawyer in the prosecutor's door in the judge's courtroom is going to win with a better deal. Meanwhile, this woman's out there hanging out to dry. She's a liar. She clearly was involved in this. The question is, what's going to happen to her next?
Right. And I wondered that. I think that's got something to do with it. Is Jake trying to help her? Because he's a bad guy. We all agree on that. He's a bad guy. Is he trying to help his wife? I mean, if he was a better person and had been a better parent, that might be more plausible, but I'm not so sure about that. But I agree. I mean, the prior abuse history, that was an aggravator. He could have definitely been eligible for the death penalty. And I think his lawyers probably told him, plea now when you're charged with second degree, while jeopardy attaches. And then they don't know the severe details because they haven't found this poor child. And, he could have gotten a much larger sentence. He could have gotten life without parole, even if he didn't get the death penalty. Correct. And so at this point, now he's facing a mandatory 25-year sentence. But even with that in California, you're parole eligible after 21 years. So, that's some hope. I was thinking, the impact on Rebecca's case. Maybe he was trying to help his wife by taking responsibility. I think it's unlikely given his history, but it's possible. But she can still plea, she can negotiate, or she could fight these charges. So I guess we'll be following this story and keeping everyone updated. I want to talk now about Melodee Buzzard. Melodee is a child. It's a sad story out of California. She went missing. School officials reported her missing after, and this is what is just the most appalling to me, she had not participated in school for a year. And then they finally figured out she was missing. So I think, there's something wrong with the system here, as we've all already known. Melodee, her name is Ashley Buzzard. Ashley's mom is the grandmother, Melodee's grandmother. Her name's Lori Miranda. So Grandma Lori told the authorities that her daughter suffers from significant mental illness and that those diseases, those mental illness, took a really drastic dive after Melodee's father was killed in a car crash when Melodee was only 6 years old. The mom has been uncooperative with authorities since they've been looking for her, but she was spotted. They believe, of course, we know how that goes. They believe she was spotted in Nebraska with her daughter. So there is hope that her daughter is still alive. But unfortunately, mom is not helping. It's just awful. Dave, Jonna, this is just awful. This poor little girl. Let me start with you, Dave. You're a former prosecutor. What can the authorities do to force this mother to help them find her daughter?
Well, this looks terrible. The whole situation looks like there's severe mental illness there. They could charge her with crimes and put pressure on her and threaten to charge her with greater crimes.
Yeah.
They could try to cut a deal with her. They could try to get more evidence around her, which would implicate her in the crime and just keep the investigation going. There's public pressure, but in the end, if she doesn't want to tell investigators, she won't tell investigators. Now, one thing that you could do, I had a case once where we cut a plea deal with a murderer because he knew where the body was, and the family said, "Please, we just want to know where our loved one is, and if he will tell us, we'll agree to a smaller sentence, not 40 years instead of life." And so we did it. We actually made the deal with the devil to get that information. So that's the one card she has, and perhaps that is one approach here, but it's a carrot and stick approach. And law enforcement is very good at this. They're used to this kind of situation, even with people with mental illness.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the mental illness is just so key here. I mean, the grandmother said that there was a history where Melodee had actually been previously taken away from her mother because the authorities found that they were living in squalor, only had rotten food, and was actually taken away. So, I just wonder how much the authorities were actually monitoring this poor child. And also, if the grandmother knows what's going on, Jonna, is there any liability here for the grandma? I mean, she knows what's going on. Can she be forced to help and get through to her daughter if her daughter knows where this child is?
And that's a problem, because when you are dealing with an adult with mental illness, it's really hard. I mean, you might know what's going on, but taking the leap from knowing what's going on and not doing anything about it, does that create a cause for endangering the welfare of a minor, especially if authorities were already involved? I'm kind of more mad right now at the school. How does a child just not show up for a year before anybody says anything? And in a case like this, even when you're dealing with a parent that has mental illness, and by the way, like around here, I'm in family court practically every day. They don't hesitate to pluck children from their biological parents and put them in the foster system. Don't hesitate. And these cases can take a long time. What got missed here? That's the big question. And how does a child just disappear? And there's nobody, there's no friend, there's no boyfriend, there's no drug dealer, there's no nobody who knows anything.
Right.
I mean, come on.
I know. I mean, does the child play sports? Do they have neighbors like that? It just seems insane to me. The grandmother, has the grandmother seen this poor child in a year? I mean, it's interesting that you're in family court, because immediately, and I don't go to family court. I avoid it like the plague because it's awful. It's depressing, but I just can't help but think, how did this get missed? How did and I'm not sure what they call it in California. Here we call it Child Protective Services. How did they miss this? How were they not monitoring that this child is not in school? They had an open case. They'd gone out before. I mean, what do you think, John? Anybody in the system could be held liable, or do we just need to have some reform? I mean, this is just such a tragedy.
I don't know if there might be some liability on the part of the school, and we call it here too, CPS, Child Protective Services. The fact that family court was involved and then, I don't know, close the case. I mean, schools are mandatory reporters. If a child doesn't show up to school, the school's going to call the parent and say, "Hey, where are you?" And then what happens if they can't get a hold of the parent? What happens next? Like, I have this is sort of, it's a little bit off topic, but not really. But I have a client who's a teacher for special ed. And one time one of her children got in some sort of trouble. So she had to contact the parent to say, "Hey, I'm going to suspend little Billy." And the parent said, "Okay, well, can you not suspend little Billy until Wednesday? Because I don't want him home on my day off. The mother didn't want to be home with
Oh my
little
God.
Billy to help little Billy reform whatever it was he did. I mean, and so that's just a horrible thing. And what are you supposed, so what's the school supposed to do in that kind of situation? Go,
Right.
okay, we'll babysit him instead of you. So
Right.
it's just really tough.
It is. Now that's tough. And that goes back to the baby Emanuel. You know, how do these parents still have kids? There's no law that says you have to be a good parent.